Hi, everybody. Today we have Jared Kleinert. And Jared, I've been dying to talk to you. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're the master networker. You've published multiple books. And as a mom, I have a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. When I hear that you started your company, so you started several startups, a couple startups, so while you were still a teenager, I hear like what comes to mind is, where were his parents? What were his parents doing? So I would love if you could take us back to that time. So take me back to when you were a regular teenager with regular aspirations. Everybody starts out wanting to go to college and get a job, and then eventually. So take me when you were just an average Joe. What happened? What was the environment around you that made you flip that switch to the entrepreneurial world?
Well, I think I was in a very privileged environment for entrepreneurship in that everyone in my family was a business owner. And in fact, if I look back even to my great grandparents, who I haven't really had the opportunity to meet, and like great grandparents, there's entrepreneurs on many sides of my family. And so my parents tried to start businesses when I was a baby, and I guess successfully started 2 restaurants, but those restaurants ultimately didn't work out too well. And so, I grew up in a cool position where I saw success around me, at least financially and with business. Uncles had successful companies, cousins, grandparents, and I was able to see what that meant to them. And, I saw transition to retirement for a couple of those people, or even selling some companies. And then my parents went back and they were more entrepreneurial. My dad worked for my grandmother and still does on a catering company in South Florida, which I got to start working at when I was probably 11 or 12. And that was really valuable to learn about work ethic and, sort of service skills. And then my mom was a recruiter, and yeah, she was always killing it with her sales figures and sort of being a top performer. But they didn't have their own companies when I was growing up. And so that was something I really wanted to take on and see if I could replicate the success stories that I had seen in my family, but do something myself and sort of create my own legacy, if you will. And so, yeah, that's why I started at such a young age. At 15, I tried to start my first business. Didn't really have a successful project going until I was 17, which ended up becoming my first book and an online community around that.
Was there a particular point? Because this could have totally gone either way, right? Not every kid wants to follow in their parents' footsteps. In fact, you get a lot of, especially in the teenage years, who want to separate themselves, who want to distance themselves from what their parents are doing, from their parents' expectations, and kind of do their own thing. You chose to follow in their footsteps, and I would love to know what was the pivotal point. If you can tell us like the story of how that seed got planted for you.
Yeah, I actually see it differently. I didn't want to follow my parents' footsteps. I saw them going through or getting trapped in what I call this vicious cycle of normalcy, and what it was like to work for other people, not necessarily have the same upward mobility that entrepreneurs have. Uh, Raising kids, makes it really challenging to uh, break off on your own and start something. And I didn't want to be in a position where my life would be dictated by other people, or if I was 2 minutes late to work, despite being a top performer, I would get penalized for that or reprimanded. And so I wanted to model, I guess, after my grandparents or after, uncles and other people in my family. And
Can you think of a specific instance? Because I am really trying to get to something happened that made you go, well, I am going to take this seriously. I'm not going to wait until I finish college. So, a lot of kids in your position would have been like, okay, then I'm going to study this in college and then I'm going to work my butt off in that way. You decided to start right away. And I want to know what happened.
yeah, I don't know if it was a specific moment, but I grew up in a divorced household as well. And so my mom did most of the raising of us. She was unemployed for a period of time during the '08 financial crisis and sort of the aftermath of that. I don't remember exactly when she was out of work, but I saw her uh, push through that, get a new job, and all the while never make it seem to me and my brother like there was any difficulty going on. And we definitely grew up middle class and had a nice upbringing by most standards, but it wasn't without struggle on the financial side or any sort of hardship. And I didn't really want to be in that position, and then I also didn't want to be in a position to just get a job to get by, or be trapped by a lifestyle, but I wanted to create something on my own that could eventually become a legacy. And with my dad, he worked for his mom and my grandmother, and there's definitely a lot to be said about entrepreneurship and sort of subscribing to someone else's vision, helping them build that. I, for whatever reason, that's just not the path I wanted to go down, and I definitely didn't want to cater for the rest of my life. There's nothing against service work. It's just from doing it 11 to 15, it's not the I didn't want to. I guess that was the only business maybe I could have potentially taken on one day in my 30s and 40s, after working for my dad and grandmother for 10, 20 years. That wasn't a path that interested me either. And so I think it was more of a slow burn to see different paths that weren't related to entrepreneurship and starting your own business. And I wasn't interested in either. And so I created my own idea when I was 15 and sort of went from there.
At which point was the person who became your mentor that kind of took you under his wing to teach you about business? Can you tell us how that happened and how it evolved?
Yeah, I guess you did your homework, but I had I had a negative mentor who was dating my mom at the time I met him. I was learning under him for about 6 months, and realized I didn't want to necessarily follow in his footsteps or implement what he was teaching me. And so, don't want to harp too much on it. My mom doesn't like when I talk about this too much. Um, I was spending a lot of time with someone who I later found out had served time in prison for securities fraud on Wall Street, and I didn't want to end up like that, of course. And I also realized that when I found out this information almost 6 months into daily interactions with this individual, I started looking back on some of our experiences and some of the decisions I was making to start my own company under his guidance. And I saw that there was a lack of integrity. I also saw that there was a lack of subject matter expertise. I was trying to create an ed tech company when I was 15 and 16. And the person I was learning from didn't know anything about education, didn't know anything about startups or technology. And so I wanted to do a 180. And that's when, I started reading the entrepreneurs and LinkedIn content, saw an article in Forbes about the most connected man you don't know in Silicon Valley, who was the founder of 15Five. And as I'm reading this article, realized that this was someone who I really wanted to learn from and ask for mentorship from, because it was a total 180. It was the article was all about how highly regarded David was, and his successful career, starting companies, and also a fun lifestyle, kite surfing and hosting dinner parties that Tim Ferriss would show up to, and Warren Buffett's former pilot would show up to, and soccer players would show up to. So that was a much more appealing lifestyle on all fronts, and sent an email and ended up getting an opportunity to work with him.
And I know that you did this a couple of times, because I want to dive into this concept that you've talked about in the past of working for free. All right, because everybody who's listening right now, they've already started their business, and they continue to hear from everybody. No, always charge for what you're worth. Always provide value and get paid for it. Never do work for free. And actually, when I started my first business, my first website I ever made, I made it for free. I went down to the local diner and I told them, I want to make your website and I'm not going to charge you at all. And they said, okay. And after that, I published that website on Facebook. I started to get referral after referral after referral. And those were my paid clients. But yes, I made a whole website for free. And I really am interested in this angle for everybody who's listening, who's starting out. I wanted to know, how did you go about this? Because you just mentioned you just sent out an email and you ended up making this happen. So this person you're speaking of is David Hassel. Is that right?
Yeah.
And he was in Silicon Valley. Were you in Atlanta at the time?
I was in South Florida.
You were in South Florida. He's in Silicon Valley. You just got out of a mentorship situation that did not work out. You are hungry for the right kind of help. Tell me what that process of finding their email address, of knowing what to write, of knowing how to follow up. Can you tell us a lot of detail of how you made that mentorship happen? And what were the terms of it?
Yeah, I think it starts with understanding what you want and what value you can bring to the table in reciprocity. And so for me, I was looking for an opportunity to work for a tech company. I was looking to work with someone I could learn under. And the idea of becoming well connected and learning soft skills really appealed to me. And so, I did less work when I was 16 and reaching out to David, but as I've replicated this over time, I've gotten increasingly intentional about how I reach out to people. I did this again when I was 18 with Keith Ferrazzi, who wrote the book Never Eat Alone. And I was very specific in why I wanted to reach out to him. I had signed a book deal for my first book a few months prior. And so I wanted to learn how to sell a lot of books. I was coming off of 2 years working for 15.5 and helping them on marketing, on building an outbound sales system. And so I knew some of the skills I could bring to the table for someone else. And I also wanted to work with someone that, again, was well connected, that was known as a super connector, and who I could continue learning these skills under. And so, step one is be intentional about who you reach out to. Step two is think about the value that you can provide to the other party. And, with 15.5, it was my time and my hunger, as you described it. For Keith, it was similar, but it was also bringing a sales system and sort of Silicon Valley marketing methodology to his business, which was in a different industry and hadn't necessarily picked up those same ideals. I also had some relationships when I reached out to Keith that I could parlay into press opportunities for him and media around a book that he was coming out with. He was publishing Never Eat Alone, Expanded and Updated, right around that time. And then three, it was sending a cold email that would, I guess, briefly introduce myself, but also make it about the other person and how I could provide value. And so in the subject line, I always put something that's either personal or sparks intrigue. And so if it sparks intrigue, you can use social proof. When I emailed Keith, I was 18, I'd done a TEDx talk. I was a soon to be published author, so those are some of the things I put, 18-year-old TEDx speaker / author to be, ... or something like that. One of my favorite subject lines these days is quick question ... Or you could personalize and say, hey, Ina, I have an idea for you. And then you'll be like, ooh, what's the idea? And click. And so, work on the subject line, set some really valuable real estate online. And then in the body of the email, it's getting immediately into how you can offer value for the other person and quickly backing up your claims. So, hey, Keith, I want to help you promote Never Eat Alone, Expanded and Updated. I'm a soon to be published author myself who's appeared in TEDx and XYZ at only 18 years old. And I have these three people I can connect you to. This is not actually what I wrote, but it's it's close. And that's how I would phrase these, or how I'd write these sort of emails today. And then close out with a very clear call to action. So can we get on Zoom on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern? If not, how's Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern? And give them a clear next step. And that's sort of all the work before you ever speak with someone. But if you're doing that work up front, it's going to be really clear how unique your approach is versus most of the bots that we see online, or other people that are just out to promote themselves and get ahead without thinking about what they can offer in return.
Right. And, a lot of the people that I interview for the show have been doing this for a long time, have been working on their craft and working on their network and everything for 10 years. I mean, you said, it's been 8 years that you've been in business, but at the time that you wrote these emails, you hadn't. You were just completely fresh, just wanted to go out there and learn. And it still piques my curiosity of how somebody who is that young, like think back, you were 15, 17, 18 years old, how you got all of that confidence and all of that grit that people who have been in business for 20 years are still trying to get. And I would love to know your perspective. You better than anybody. What do you think was the you can attribute to the fact that you had so much grit and so much confidence to just go and say, nothing is impossible, and I'm just going to step out there and do what I want?
Objectively, I don't see a lot of downside to sending those emails. And so, it's all positive, or they just don't respond, or, the worst thing that's going to happen is they say, stop emailing me.
Right.
Okay. And so I guess I didn't and don't see a ton of downside. What I can share as far as building confidence that was super helpful for me from 15 to 16 was when I started my first business. I was actually pretty shy and introverted. And as soon as I got my license, I started going to a lot of conferences in South Florida and startup weekend events and pitch events, and putting myself out there to pitch different ideas, or to join little startup hackathon teams, or to go to conferences and walk up to the person who was on stage. And that was extremely valuable, and I think broke me out of my shell a little bit, so that by the time I was sending these cold emails or starting to actually work with teams in person, because I did spend a summer when I was 17 in Silicon Valley with the 15-5 team, or when I was on different calls with book contributors and convincing them to join, I had already broken out of my shell and was also starting to gain some of these soft skills under David and under Keith later. So that was probably the biggest shift for me, and something that is replicable for someone listening, is if you do feel like you're shy or reserved, put yourself out there. And post pandemic, go to a lot of events, do things that are uncomfortable, go up to the speaker, or if it's a pitch event, get up on stage and pitch. If you would like, you can do things virtually, and just unmute yourself in meetings and talk and share. And you don't have to have any expectation of those initial outcomes as far as meeting new people. It's really just getting reps of introducing yourself, talking, being in those groups of people. It's invaluable later on, and then no one's going to shake your confidence, or it's not going to matter if you're around someone who's prominent. You'll feel more comfortable than before.
Yeah, a lot of people who are listening may have a full-time job as they're starting their business. So I'm going to relate that to you being in school, right? It's like you were sitting at home twiddling your thumbs trying to figure out what to do, and like, hey, I'm going to go to a conference. So for everybody out there who has already a full-time job, and here you are saying, well, if you want to really make this happen for yourself, go out and meet people, go out and put yourself in those uncomfortable situations, go out and do it. What advice would you give to people who are juggling multiple things at once? How did you do it?
I cared less and less about school and didn't do homework. And it mean, my junior year of high school, I probably skipped 30 out of the 180 days of school. And then my senior year of high school, I studied on a local college campus and was able to compress my schedule so that I was only taking classes Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so that gave me the opportunity to leave town for a conference on Thursday night and come back, Monday at night or Tuesday morning if I needed to, or just focus most of my week on work as opposed to school. And so ideally, you would put yourself in a position where you can maximize your time for what you care about most. And so, we're all working remotely right now. It's probably the best time to actually have that side hustle. And as long as you can be productive with your time, then you can focus on your side hustle or business idea and still get your job done with work. And it's not a popular answer with employers necessarily, but we're talking about starting a business here and creating something that you want to leave a legacy for. I have friends at Google right now, and I'm like, this is the perfect time for you to finally, prepare for that jump, because you don't have to go into an office or travel. You could do your job, and if you can get it done in 2 hours or 4 hours, and you got the rest of the day to work on your thing. And that's not always possible. So a year ago, I would have said, see if you can be a remote worker first, and then start doing your own thing, or just work harder on weekends, or call in sick, or do whatever you need to do to give yourself that time. But now is a perfect opportunity if you're employed and also looking to create something on the side. And so for me, when I was in school, it was honestly just caring less about school and focusing more on work. And I felt confident in doing that because I also, I had good grades. I wasn't necessarily worried about graduating. Just like if you're not worried about getting fired, then you can do this. But if you're worried about your job, then you should probably focus on that. So I'm thankful I was in a position to not worry about my survival in school. And I also wasn't prioritizing college anymore. Like I definitely grew up wanting to get into Harvard or Stanford, and had the grades to back that up, up until maybe 10th grade. But I had the hardest class schedule out of my entire public high school of like 550 people. So if I had straight A's, I would have been valedictorian and gone to whatever school I want. But, I just realized that college wasn't going to be that important for me. I ended up not going to college at all after taking 2 gap years, and started putting my time towards what I thought could be more valuable for me, which was starting companies, working for people that I really respected, and building a network.
Can we talk a little bit about your first book? How did the idea come about for it? And you were already, like we said, busy with school, busy, interning for David Hassel. You were doing all of these things already. Where did the idea come about for the book? Where did you find the time to write it? And then we're going to get into self-publishing versus traditional. Like, I want you to tell me the story of your first book.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to attend a conference hosted by the Thiel Foundation. They're behind the Thiel Fellowship program, where they were paying kids to drop out of school and build businesses instead. And I attended this conference when I was 17 in New York, and had my mind blown by all the people that I met, because it was the first time I was around other like-minded individuals who were my age, teenagers who had millions of downloads on apps they'd created, had raised millions of dollars for their companies, were trying to think about how to mine asteroids for precious metals. The youngest astrophysicist in the world was in the room, and on and on and on. And I just had such a great time there socially. Really felt like I'd found my tribe. And then there was a speaker towards the end of the event who made this case that there was 20 people selected for the Thiel Fellowship each year, that there was 200 people or so in the room, and yet there was 2 billion people in the room, or 2 billion people in the world at or under 20 years old. And so that concept, the 2 billion under 20, stuck with me. And then it also, I realized in the weeks following the event that it might be interesting to crowdsource stories from the people that attended this event and see how they're accomplishing what they're doing at such a young age, because it is a unique time in history where until maybe the millennial generation, you haven't had teenagers and people in their early 20s who had access to the rest of the world through modern technology with global communications and social media networks. Someone like Malala being able to lead tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people all around the world and actually affect change, it's not possible for Gen X or for boomers. And no, it's not a knock on anyone in that generation. They just didn't have the connectivity that we do now. Yeah. And there's also institutions around us crumbling and the rule books being thrown out the window. And so it was just interesting to be in that Teal Foundation community. And when I shared the idea for this book in a Facebook group that we had for attendees of that event, it caught on like wildfire. There was a lot of people that wanted to work on the book with me. There was people that wanted to contribute. And so we ended up on a model of writing where we had 75 contributors who shared 3 to 5 page stories about formative life experiences that they'd had, as well as practical takeaways for the reader. And so from a reader standpoint, we wanted older generations to learn how millennials tick and why they're able to break down barriers and achieve success unlike ever before in history. And for young people like your kids, we wanted to show them different models of success, and that you didn't just have to get a degree, but if you got degrees, there's all these advanced tracks that you can go down, and you didn't just have to start a tech company. You could do something in the nonprofit space or become an athlete or an actor. But if you wanted to start a tech company, then here's all these different opportunities. And it was just a really unique amalgam of people. We went beyond the Teal Foundation community and got a very diverse group of individuals to contribute. And sought out a book deal, got a deal with St. Martin's Press in New York. And
can you tell us more about how that deal happened?
It was, again, just trial by fire. I cold emailed 20 or 30 literary agents, and we got one who took us up and worked with us. The literary agent's job is to then help you put together a book proposal and to pitch your idea to different editors. And so we didn't really know what we were doing. We actually had the entire manuscript done before we pitched different editors. And so they didn't really have a lot of work to do after they acquired our book. And, when I look back on that project, there was definitely things I would do differently in the proposal writing process, even in the agent selection and the editor selection process. There's all these different things to think about if you want to become an author. First is developing your platform, because publishers care about whether or not you can sell books, more so, I would say, than they care about what you're writing about. And so it was actually announced today or yesterday that President Obama is coming out with a new book, and they've already done, I think, 3 million prints for the first edition. This book's coming out in November. They had to outsource some of the supply chain to Germany, and they're shipping hundreds of thousands of copies to the US for the release of this book. But most first-time authors aren't going to sell 1 million books, let alone 1,000 books. And publishers are basically betting on which books and authors they think are going to succeed or not. And so you have to come to the table with a marketing plan, with a platform to say, hey, I have 10,000 people on my email list, or I have 100,000 people that have downloaded my podcast. And then you also have to think about where your book is in terms of the marketplace. So if you're looking to get a publishing deal, those publishers are looking at all different types of books. They're seeing basically what stories are going to resonate with the business world or with culture in a year from now when the book may come out, or in 2 years from now. And so they're almost like investors in the tech world. And I would argue they're not great investors. I'm a big proponent of self-publishing, for most people, because you can speed up the timeline. You can better align the message of your book with your business. If you're looking to use your book as a opt-in or as a business card for your consulting services or speaking, you can retain the rights to all of your writing as opposed to selling that when you get in advance. You can control all the design aspects. All these things are given away to the publishers when you sign that book deal. And so with 3 billion under 30, I ended up self-publishing and had a different experience, learned a lot from that as well. But it was able to better align the book promotion with a continual business, and actually was able to get contact information for my readers because I sold it through my website and Amazon, as opposed to selling 2 billion under 20 through Amazon and through bookstores, where they would get all the contact information. Whereas through my website, I know the name, the email, the phone number, the address of people that buy my book. And so then I can keep a dialogue going with them, support their work in the future. They can work with me. So we could have an hour-long conversation just about books.
I know. I particularly love this topic, and I know everybody who's listening, they have a book in them, and all of this has been gold for them. So what is next for you? Tell us a little bit of what you're doing right now, and how people can hook into the events that you have coming up.
Yes. So I'll give a super quick fast forward, but my cold email to Keith Ferrazzi led to me starting a marketing consulting firm that I ran for 4 or 5 years. Worked with New York Times bestselling authors, Fortune 1000s, VC-backed startups on marketing and business development strategy while the books were coming out. So, first book came out. It was called the #1 entrepreneurship book of the year in 2015, according to the Axiom Business Book Awards. And then 3 billion under 30 came out. I was very fortunate to work with hundreds of the world's smartest and most talented millennials in that process, because we had 75 contributors to each book. And so using what I learned from David Hassel, from Keith, some other mentors along the way, I built what many would call like a world-class network. And I realized that I didn't necessarily want to run a consulting business, and I didn't know where the book business was going to go, or speaking for that matter. And so back in late 2017, I was thinking about what was going to happen next, and ended up starting a mastermind group. And so January 2018, we did our first Meeting of the Minds Summit. Essentially reached out to consulting clients, people in my network, book contributors, said, hey, why don't you join us in Atlanta? And then we did another one the following weekend in New York. So why don't you join us in person, meet 30 really smart people from all different backgrounds who are all running their own companies, and see if you can walk away with some lifelong friends or some new business partners or referrals, some breakthrough ideas for your company or any strategy or issues that you have. And we invited all these people. They said yes. They joined us for these summits, and they got a ton of value out of it. It was so much fun, and we developed a business from that. And so my main work today is running a company called Meeting of the Minds. We do quarterly in-person summits for entrepreneurs, pretty intimate, between 20 and 40 people, and we'll go to Napa Valley or Bermuda or New York, or have people in Atlanta. And then at the beginning of the pandemic, we also started a monthly virtual experience that we call Deep Dives. And so each month we'll pick a topic of interest to the general community and do 2 days of training on that, but also keep some of the mastermind elements and really focus on connecting everyone and having them walk away with a whole new network. And so we'll do a marketing and business development deep dive, or we'll do a crisis management deep dive, or a time management and business operations deep dive, thought leadership deep dive, and talk about books and speaking and all that fun stuff. And so that is what I do, and bring people together, connect them. That is the pleasure that I have every single day. And I also write a lot of content online. I have a newsletter that's available where I've published some of my thoughts on writing books and getting book deals, and some of the things that you referenced. So I'm either writing, whether it's a newsletter, or eventually I'll do more books, or I'm connecting people virtually or in person with Meeting of the Minds.
I love it. And we're going to put your links in the description so everybody can go and check out what you have coming up. Let me ask you another question, Jared. As we're winding down, what do you think is the biggest misconception that people have about being a successful and visible entrepreneur like you?
When you're comparing yourself to others, you're seeing the best version of themselves or the version that they want to share with the world on social media or in some conversations. You're not seeing all the struggles that they're going through or what's under the hood. And many times it's not that impressive, or they're going after vanity metrics. Even revenue is a vanity metric if you're not looking at profit. And social media account is a revenue or is a vanity metric if you're not looking at engagement and where that engagement is tracking towards building a business. So it's a message to myself and to others, but don't compare yourself to others. You're in your own race, hopefully building your own company and having fun.
Thank you so much for saying that, because that's one thing that everybody just falls into, is a comparisonitis that exists out there, especially in the online world. So my final question to you is, I'm about to give you the power to get everybody who's listening to you right now. They have to do whatever you tell them to do in the next 24 hours. And they have to do it. It could be something to improve their life, to increase their revenue, to make their network better, but they have to do it in the next 24 hours. Whatever comes out of your mouth right now, what would that be?
Let's stick with the cold email theme. That's been life-changing for me, and on multiple occasions. I still cold email people to this day, and send a cold email to someone that you want as a mentor, someone that you want as a potential partner, someone that you would identify as your sort of dream client if you could work with anyone. And if necessary, work with them for free to create a compelling case study or to get your foot in the door. Propose a time to hop on Zoom, or if they're in your city, offer a socially distanced coffee. But don't be afraid to send that cold email in the next 24 hours.
And finally, Jared, thank you so much for spending all this time with us. How can people find you and find out more about Meeting of the Minds?
Yeah, email me anytime, jaredkleinert@gmail.com. And like I said before, you can go to motm.co to learn about all the upcoming deep dives and quarterly summits. And you could also check out the newsletter at motm.substack.com.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to put all those links here. Jared, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and good luck with everything.
Yeah, thank you, Ina.
Thank you.